Hello. So this is the first of our demos. And the purpose of these demos is I want to show you kind of how the workflow of the development is going to go throughout the semester. I'm going to also use these demos to kind of give you a little bit of insight on the tools I will be using. For example, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Node.js, Git, databases in Postgres. You're going to have to know a little bit about all of these things to kind of put together your project at the end of the semester. Um, so in this first demo, I very quickly wanted to walk you through the workflow of Heroku. You're going to probably do this for every single assignment and the project actually many times. So it helps to kind of see this. If you haven't done so already, I would recommend that you go to the course website, go under software, the software link, and go to Heroku Dev Center tutorial. So run through this tutorial. What I'm going to show you right now are just the first few steps of the tutorial. For the first few weeks of the semester, we won't be touching the database at all. So I won't talk about the database, although if you run through the whole tutorial, you will have a fully functioning web application that also has a database attached to it. Now, the first thing we'll have to see is that we're going to need a Heroku account. So for the Heroku account, I do recommend that you use your SFU login or your SFU email to generate this Heroku account. Um, I understand, or the thing that you have to understand is that the servers for Heroku are not located in Canada, and there is a law in BC that says all instructional material has to be located on servers that are in Canada. However, if you are using your applications or your work for your portfolio and you're going to show this to an employer, it probably makes a lot of sense to have it attached to SFU, especially if you're looking for co-op or anything like that. So that said, if you are sensitive about having your data, outside on servers outside of Canada, then by all means use a different email. But I do have to tell you this blurb just because, I have to let you know of this. So use a different email if you're sensitive of having information that's stored outside of Canada. So once you have your Heroku account, you will be given 5 free applications to host. You will be hosting on the Heroku servers. Um, you'll also be asked to install Node.js and NPM, and I'll let you run through those tutorials very quickly. Next thing you have to do is set up your Git installation and also your Git startup. So your Git setup. So I've already done this already. In addition, you will also need to install the Heroku tool belt for either macOS or Windows or Linux, depending on what operating system you're running on. So I'm going to assume that you've done all of these things, and I'm also going to assume that you are quite familiar with Git already from something like Computing 127 or from other courses that have used Git. What you probably haven't used Git for is for coordination and for communication between teammates or anything like that. So this is primarily what we're going to focus on in this course. Now, for the first for our first application, we're going to clone this setup that is from Heroku. So the purpose of this project is that Heroku has already given us a template project which has all the configurations for sending it to Heroku, for sending it onto the server. So it's not a requirement that you clone this project. You can start from fresh, but I would highly recommend that if you start an assignment, it's probably better just to start from the template and go from there. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is I'm going to go into a folder. I've made a folder called No Demo, and in here I'm going to clone this application. So so I'm going to do a git clone and then this project from the GitHub repository. I'm going to call this comp276 demo. and it's going to clone it into a folder called com276 demo. All right, I'm going to jump into that folder, and I'm going to take a look at the layout of this project. So this is a typical Node project. I'm going to use Atom for this. It is up to you what text editor you would like to use. I prefer using Atom because it's worked for me many times, and you're free to use Sublime or any other text editor that you're comfortable with. So I'm going to open this up and take a look at the structure of a typical Node application. Now, as we get into Node, I'm actually going to go into a lot more detail about how a Node application is structured. But for now, what I want you to see is that our project has all of these files in it. Now we're going to see what each of these files are used for eventually as we talk more and more about Node. But the first thing I'm going to open up is index.js. Index.js is basically creating the server for me. Okay, so this is basically all the code that we need to run our server. So running a server called Express. So there's an Express a library in Node.js, which basically allows us to create servers. Now, for now, the only thing I want you to notice is that we are running, we're running a server and we have a static path to public, to a public folder. You should also notice that we have a public folder here. So this corresponds to this folder here. And so every static request that we receive is first going to go through this public folder. So what that means is later on when I run this server and I look for a path on the server, the first thing that this server is going to do is look inside this folder to see if it's there. If it's there, then it's gonna serve up that file. If it's not, then it's going to use the rest of this this definition in order to satisfy that request. Okay, so um, so the so the next thing that we need to do is we should take a look at this public folder. So in this public folder right now, there's a folder called Style Sheets. There's Node, SVG, and the PNG. So these are all the public assets that we have. There's also a style sheet called main.css. All right. So the first thing that we'll do is I'm going to create a new file here. And in this new file, I'm going to call this mypage.html. So I'm going to create a mypage.html file inside of this public folder. Now, HTML file has a particular structure. So I've posted some notes on the structure of HTML. And basically, the HTML structure looks something like this. We have a document type, so we have to define what type of document we're writing. Here we're writing an HTML document. Typically, we have an HTML beginning container and an ending container. So this container here says that everything in between is under the HTML scope. And here we have a header, we have a body. The header is all about the sort of the metadata or the information about this page. So it includes the char sets that we'll be using. It includes all the links that we'll be using, all the scripts that we'll be using. Are there any style sheets that are associated with this web page? And then a title. So maybe I'll call this title My Web Page. I'm going to fill this in with a lot more things later in this in the demos. But inside the body, we can fill in other things. So the body is basically the body of our web page. The body of the web page can contain certain elements like sectioning elements. So one one type of sectioning element is called a main tag. So let's say in our main tag, I have hello, hello world. All right, so this is indicating that in our body, we have a main portion, and in the main portion, there is some text called hello world. Okay, so I want you to notice that in HTML, there is some sort of hierarchy going on here. So in HTML, underneath HTML, there are two children. There is a head child and a body child. And under the body child, there's a main child. And under the main child, there's some text that's hello world. Now, this, all of this can get nested, and we can, come up with some very nice, uh, nice layout for our HTML. Um, but typically what HTML is used for is the structure of a document. So right here, what you're seeing is that this web page has a body which has a main structure to it. And inside there is some text that is sitting inside this main structure. So this is describing the structure of the document. Now, what this doesn't do is describe how I'm going to display hello world. It is displayed in a large font? What type of font it's displayed as? What color is it? And so on. So all of those things are under a style sheet, which I'll talk about in our next demo. All right. So right now we have a pretty simple web page called My Page, and it is under public. And now you'll notice that I've put this page in and I made some changes to it. And at least in Atom, it has color coded this page. So meaning that this is something that needs to be added to Git in order for me to be able to push it into the repository. All right. So I'm going to jump back um, into our command prompt here. I'm going to jump into this folder. Now I'm in the root folder of my application, right? So if I take a look at the things that are inside, you'll see that, this is our application. There's a index.js, there's a public folder, and inside that public folder, I've just created a document. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to we need to create an application on Heroku. So what I need to do right now is log into Heroku. Now you may have already logged in, right? If you've followed the tutorial, you may have logged in. But if you haven't, you can do a Heroku login, and it will direct you. Well, at least it should direct you to press any key to open a browser, and it will direct you to this this Heroku login. So this is the authentication system for Heroku.com. So this is where we're going to log in. I'm going to log in with my account. And after we've logged in, if we go back to our command prompt, you'll see that we're now logged in as this user. Okay, so once we're logged in as this user, now we can create a new application. So the application that we just cloned, what we want to do is we want to push all of these items up to the server and have it serve our application. All right, but before we do that, what I want to do is do a git add. Okay, now git add basically says everything that has changed in since we last cloned the application, I want to add to it. So I want to add to it, and then I'm going to do a git commit. Now git commit typically will have a message that's associated with it. This -m is the message that we want to kind of tag this commit by, and I'm going to say added static file my page. All right, so make it as descriptive as you can, so that we know what commits are associated with what changes. Okay, so I'm going to do a git commit. Now it says that one file has changed. I've added the file here, my page.html. This is the change that has been made since the last commit. So now I'm ready to do a git push Heroku master. All right, so let me just talk about what each one of these parts mean. So git is our command that we're going to use. Push means I'm going to do a push up to uh, our remote repository. So I'm going to do a push on the Heroku URL. So what you didn't actually see was when we create, I'm sorry, I forgot to do one thing. I forgot to do a Heroku create. Okay, so let me first do a Heroku create, and I'm going to do a Heroku create comp 276 demo. All right, so Heroku create means I'm going to create a new application, and I'm going to call it comp 276 demo. Now, this last parameter is not necessary. If you don't add this, it will actually give you some random name. And also, if this name has already been taken, it will give you an error when it does the creation. So I hope nobody has taken this name before. So I will do a create, and it's going to create this application. So this is what I was talking about earlier. It will give you a URL. So this first URL is referring to where our application is going to be sitting. So if I ever want to see my application running, I'm going to go to this URL. The second one is the Git repository, this Git URL, and it is automatically attached to this variable called Heroku. Okay, so this is going to be attached to Heroku. Now, earlier, I was typing in this command, git push Heroku master. Right. So git push means I'm going to have everything under git here get pushed over to the Heroku repository. So this is the Heroku repository. Remember earlier I said that this URL is now attached to this variable, and I want to push it to the master branch. Okay, so the master branch, we'll talk about what those branches mean when we get into our tutorial on Git, but it's going to push it to the master branch. Okay, and this is basically how we get our application running on Heroku. Okay, so I'm going to push this. So it's going to take all of the files that I've cloned, as well as I've just created the my page.html. It's going to take all of those files and it's going to push onto the server. Okay, so you can take a look at all the things that it's doing. You basically don't really need to know what's happening here, but right now we find that this application has been deployed. It is on the master branch, and this is the Git repository that we push to. Okay, so now if I wanted to take a look at the result of the application, then I can type in Heroku open. Okay. Now, the key that I want you to see at this point is that when we do Heroku open, we are essentially opening this URL. Okay, so this command does nothing more than to open your browser and to go to this URL. So when we do Heroku open, it's going to direct us over to our browser, and it's going to open our application to this URL. Okay, now that what you're seeing here is a default page. Now I'm going to tell you in a later demo where this default page is coming from. But for now, what we want to find out is our path actually working? Now remember, I put my page.html with a hello world, and I put it under public. Okay, so remember also that our server, the server that we've programmed, is saying that the first request, the first thing I want to do with a request is go into the public folder and see if I can satisfy that request. If I can't, then I'll use the rest of this. Okay, so what I mean by this is if we go back to our browser and I type in a path like slash my, what did we call it? mypage.html. So if we type in mypage.html, then it should direct me to the page that says hello world. Okay, so what it did at this point is our server was looking into the public folder for to satisfy our request for mypage.html. Now, if I made another request for another page and it wasn't there, right, so it couldn't find it in the public folder, then it would use all these other things in order to try to satisfy that request. And all these other things I'll talk about in a later demo. Okay, so I'll talk about what all these things mean later on. Okay, so for now, what I want you to see is basically this whole process. So the process that we go through once again is that we make changes. So the first thing we do is we make changes over here. Okay, so if we add a file, so notice that once we pushed that all of the color codes actually, went back to normal. So if we go to my page and I make some more changes, hello world, and then I'll write comp276. Now make the change. So once again, it'll have a different color. I've made some changes to it. So if I want to add that, if I want to deploy this to our server, so notice right now, if I go to my page, it doesn't have comp276 in there. If I go back to here and I do a git, so notice that I'm in the root of my application. If I do a git add and I do a git commit and give it a good message, added course ID to my page.html. So you can make it as descriptive as you want it, And now it says I've added I've made an insertion into a file, and then I'm going to do git push Heroku master. Okay, now again, Heroku is referring to my Git repository. So if I push this, it'll go through the exact same process that you saw before. It'll install all the dependencies. I'll talk about what all those what that means in a later demo. It'll do some cleaning up, and then it'll push it to the master branch. Okay, so at this point, if we go back here, it'll be deployed, and we'll have comp276 there. Okay, so this is basically what you're going to go through many, many times in this course. Now, I know I've made a small change and I've actually pushed it to the deployment. So the purpose of Git is that we typically don't need to deploy every single time. We can actually make a commit and we can make changes until we're happy with it, until we've reached a specific checkpoint, and then we can push everything into production. Okay, so in our next tutorial, what we're going to talk about is how we're going to be able to do, how we're going to develop kind of locally in our local environment. And when we're done, then do the final push into production. So what I mean by production is basically into a location, onto a server that is viewable by everybody, by the general public. Okay, so I'm going to stop the demo here for now, and I'm going to pick it up in our next demo.